All right, Chapter 7, Lesson 3, page 280, Cycles in the Biosphere. Name, class, date. Science FNT, Chapter 7, Lesson 3, page 280, Cycles in the Biosphere. Main idea, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water cycle through the biosphere. Organisms use them again and again. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water cycle through the biosphere. Organisms use them again and again. Okay, fold your paper in half. Vocabulary terms, nitrogen fixation, page 284. There it is. The process of changing nitrogen gas into usable nitrogen compounds is called nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation, nitrogen gas is turned into a usable compound. Photosynthesis, page 280. In photosynthesis, plants use energy from the sun to change carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. Photosynthesis, plants use energy from sun equals carbon dioxide and water changes into glucose and oxygen. Respiration, page 281. Respiration is the process in which organisms obtain the energy stored in glucose by causing it to react with oxygen. So respiration, organisms obtain energy stored in glucose, react with oxygen. Transpiration, page 286. The process through which water evaporates from plant leaves is known as transpiration. Transpiration, water evaporates from plant leaves. All right, our first section of notes, photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis and respiration. Like the jogger below, you breathe faster and more deeply as you run because your body needs more oxygen. Breathe faster and deeper as run, zoop, need oxygen. Okay, not zoop, not a comma, but an arrow. Did you know that algae and plants produce the oxygen in the atmosphere? Algae and plants produce oxygen. I have not underlined it yet. Don't underline it yet. You'll see why later. Plants provide oxygen and food through the process of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, plants use energy from the sun, to change carbon dioxide and water plus CO2 plus H2O. CO2 is carbon dioxide, H2O is water. Into, you use an arrow, glucose and oxygen. I put energy because we learned up here that glucose is actually a sugar, is actually energy. So energy plus O2 for oxygen. So then I drew little double arrows and wrote photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is plants and algae using the sun's energy combined with carbon dioxide and water, converting all of that into energy and oxygen. They use the energy to live or to grow or to reproduce, and the oxygen goes out into the air, and other things like animals and humans use that to breathe. The simple sugar glucose is stored in the plant's cells. It provides food and energy for plants, for animals that eat plants, and then for animals that eat other animals. The oxygen is released into the atmosphere. Okay, so what they're saying is the plants use that simple sugar, glucose, for food and energy. If something comes along and eats the plant, they get some of that energy And if something eats the animal, they get a little bit of that energy. Trees and other plants produce oxygen during photosynthesis. Okay, during photosynthesis, they produce oxygen. People and other animals produce carbon dioxide during respiration. We're going to see that in the next section of notes. So, over here with the green plants is photosynthesis, creating oxygen. The runner uses the oxygen to run, performing respiration, breathing out carbon dioxide that then the plants can use again. So it's a constant cycle. Plants are not the only organisms that conduct photosynthesis. Algae that live in water and some types of bacteria also carry out photosynthesis. In fact, algae in the oceans supply most of Earth's oxygen. So I underlined algae for algae and plants producing oxygen because really most of our oxygen comes from algae. Most organisms are able to use the energy in food through cell respiration. Respiration is the process in which organisms obtain the energy stored in glucose by causing it to react with oxygen. So the glucose plus O2 for oxygen. That's the reaction, glucose plus oxygen. Water and carbon dioxide are released as byproducts. Okay, so glucose, the sugar, plus oxygen during respiration. You get energy out of that, so like the energy to run, or the energy to grow, or the energy to think and move. And then you also get water, H2O, and carbon dioxide, CO2. So respiration is when glucose and oxygen combine or react, giving you energy. You have water as a byproduct and carbon dioxide as a byproduct. The carbon dioxide you tend to breathe out. Water is either used in your cells and throughout your body, like the blood flowing through your system, or you could sweat it out, like if you're running really hard, that water comes out as sweat to cool you down. Or you might even go to the bathroom to get rid of any waste products that your body has. It filters all that waste out. Okay, both plants and animals perform respiration, as do many other organisms. Respiration is why oxygen is so important to life on Earth, including human life. The oxygen you take in with every breath fuels respiration in your body. Your blood carries oxygen to cells throughout your body, where respiration takes place. Do you notice anything unusual about photosynthesis and respiration? Okay, notice that they're color coding things here. Carbon dioxide in blue on the left of the arrow, carbon dioxide in blue on the right of the arrow. So this is one of the materials being used, but this is a byproduct. The opposite is true in respiration. Oxygen gets used in respiration, but is a byproduct of photosynthesis. So in photosynthesis, you have plants and algae using carbon dioxide, combining that with water, and using some of their energy to create glucose or sugar and store it, and then they give off oxygen. For respiration, animals, humans, even some plants use the glucose that they either store or eat from plants and eat other animals, combine it with oxygen, like when we run. It gives off carbon dioxide, so we breathe that out. We also get water, which either stays in our body or goes off as like sweat or going to the bathroom or even just moisture in our breath. And we get energy out of it. We get the energy to run and think and move. Okay, those are the exact same things we have here for photosynthesis and respiration. Go ahead and take your blue, underline carbon dioxide. Notice it's on the left of the arrow here, but on the right over here. Oxygen is the opposite. It's on the right, or a byproduct in photosynthesis, but it is a supply material that you need in respiration. They are opposite processes. Opposite processes. The products of photosynthesis are used in respiration. The products of respiration are used in photosynthesis. Use each other's products. In this way, oxygen and carbon dioxide keep cycling through the biosphere. Cycle. The relationship between photosynthesis and respiration is one way that organisms depend on one another. So, up here, plants and algae do photosynthesis. Over here, organisms, animals, and humans use respiration. Draw a double arrow between the two. Rely on each other. They rely on each other. Oh, oh, oh. Animals and other organisms need plants for food and oxygen. Plants rely on other organisms for the carbon dioxide they use to make food. Okay, sequence. After an animal eats a plant, what are the steps in respiration? Okay, so after an animal eats a plant, they uptake or take in or absorb the glucose, the sugar. Then their body reacts that sugar with oxygen, and you get energy out of it, you get water out of it, and then they breathe out carbon dioxide. Those are the byproducts. Byproducts. Okay, flip it over, turn the page. Oh yeah, here we go. The carbon cycle and oxygen cycle. Carbon cycle and oxygen cycle. Carbon is the fourth most abundant element on Earth and is a basic part of all living things. Carbon equals basic part of living things. Carbon is part of every body cell, every sugar, and the carbon dioxide found in the air. Body cells, zoop, sugar, zoop, CO2 for carbon dioxide. Carbon is also found in Earth's crust. Crust. Much of Earth's carbon is found underground in fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and natural gas. Fossil fuels, parentheses, coal, oil, gas. Close it. Even more is stored in rocks and sediments. Nature slowly releases this carbon to the environment. The carbon cycle. Carbon moves through the carbon cycle mostly as carbon dioxide gas. Recall that plants take in carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. This carbon goes into the glucose molecules formed. Okay, so carbon dioxide, CO2. Plants take it in, arrow, plants. Goes into glucose molecules that are formed, sugar. Later, when plant-eating organisms consume the glucose, the carbon returns to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So they get energy out of it, and you get carbon dioxide coming back out, and that closes the loop. Remember the previous question? It asked, what are the steps in respiration? Well, there you go. Sugar or glucose is consumed, broken down to get energy out of it, and then you're left with the byproducts of water and carbon dioxide all over again. Carbon also moves through the environment in other ways. When organisms die, for example, some carbon remains in their bodies. Organisms such as bacteria and fungi break down organic matter. In the process of decomposition, they return carbon to the environment. Okay, that's going to be like the mushrooms over here. The carbon stored in fossil fuels is also returned to the environment. Burning fossil fuels quickly releases long ago stored carbon into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So, burn fuel, whoop, CO2. And that fuel could be coal to power a power plant, oil, like for gasoline in your cars, gas, like natural gas to heat your home. Could even be wood, like burning wood. That's considered a type of fuel that releases CO2. Okay, let's see. We did all that. The oxygen cycle. Oxygen also cycles through the environment. As you have learned, oxygen is produced during photosynthesis and consumed during respiration. So, photosynthesis creates oxygen, O2, but gets used in respiration. Another source of oxygen is water vapor in the atmosphere, which breaks down chemically. Oxygen is also consumed during combustion, rusting, and during chemical weathering of rocks. So, oxygen gets used in combustion and from rust, things that rust, like steel and iron. Okay, because oxygen is part of carbon dioxide, the oxygen cycle is linked to the carbon cycle. Double arrows from O2 all the way up to CO2, both cycles linked. Both elements cycle between living and non-living things in the environment. Okay, page 282 to 283. That's this picture, and we'll talk about the picture in a moment. Write those pages down. Human activity can upset these natural cycles. For example, cutting and burning forests leads to less oxygen being produced through photosynthesis. Right? So if you cut down trees, there's not as many plants creating oxygen. Less oxygen will enter the atmosphere, and less carbon dioxide will leave. Carbon dioxide helps Earth's atmosphere trap heat to keep Earth's surface warm. Okay, let's go back to combustion. Combustion includes things like oil, but can also include wood, like the forests we're talking about here. CO2 traps heat! Most scientists argue that an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide could cause an increase in global temperatures. Remember, we learned about that in the sections about weather in the atmosphere, that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It traps in the heat of the sun. So if we chop down all the trees, none of the CO2 is getting used. It's still in the atmosphere. And we're not getting as much oxygen. And all that extra CO2 starts trapping heat and making things warmer. Same thing for burning all these fossil fuels under the ground. All of a sudden, all this carbon that used to be underground in the form of a fossil or a bone or oil gets released into the atmosphere and increases how much is in the atmosphere. This could lead to melting of glaciers and other land ice, causing flooding when ocean levels rise. Okay, how are the carbon cycle and oxygen cycle connected? All right, let's look at our notes. The carbon cycle and the oxygen cycle are connected because oxygen, the O2 and CO2, and oxygen, just the oxygen gas itself, are on both sides of the cycle. Oxygen combines with carbon as carbon dioxide, and plants use that to create sugar and basically store energy. Oxygen gets breathed during respiration by animals and humans in order for us to be able to use the energy we get from those sugars. Okay, I think we've covered just about everything there. Let's talk about this picture. Carbon dioxide and oxygen cycle. Both carbon dioxide, CO2, and oxygen, O2, cycle among the air, the ground, and living things. Beep, beep, doop. How do plants and animals perform opposite roles in the cycle? How are human actions changing the cycle? Okay, well, plants use carbon dioxide and create oxygen. Right, where is that at? Here we go. Algae take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen during photosynthesis. So there's an example. The blue CO2 coming in and getting used, the red O2 oxygen going out and getting produced. Animals, on the other hand, animals take in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide, the opposite. So the oxygen is coming in for them to breathe or respiration. and they give off carbon dioxide that the plants and algae will use later. Okay, how are human actions changing the cycle? Well, we're burning fossil fuels, so carbon that used to be underground is now being put into the atmosphere. So it's increasing the amount of carbon dioxide and pollutants from what used to be there. What else? If we chop down trees or we harm bacteria and algae, there will be less plants and less algae to create the oxygen that we need. That would also mean that there would be extra carbon dioxide, again, making things even warmer. And then if we use fossil fuels in our production processes, same problem as with the cars. We're putting more carbon dioxide into the air than the plants and algae can handle. So we can end up changing and unbalancing this cycle. Okay, what else? When wood or fossil fuels are burned or decompose, carbon dioxide is added to the atmosphere. Getting too much carbon dioxide. Trees and other plants take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. Okay, that's a good thing. Trees use the carbon dioxide, create sucrose or sugar for energy storing, and they give off oxygen that we can breathe for respiration. As bacteria and fungi break down dead plants and animals, they use oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. So bacteria and fungi have respiration also. They are organisms. Automobiles add carbon dioxide and pollutants to the atmosphere when they burn fuel. Bad thing. Fossil fuels found deep in the ground contain carbon that was once part of living organisms. So if that carbon is underground, nothing's happening to it. But if we burn it and use it, then we end up putting more of this blue carbon dioxide out into the atmosphere, and it ends up being more than the plants and the algae can handle. All right, that was a long one. There were a lot of notes to take, but of course you can pause along the way. Please make sure to use your colors. It will help you. Good job persevering with the growth mindset. And roar, Wildcats!